Hello and welcome to the Inside Risk and Compliance podcast. I'm your host, Adam Spencer, Director of AJ Fox Compliance, a specialist recruitment agency focusing on all things law firm risk and compliance. I have seen so many people carve amazing and fulfilling careers in this space, and it really has been a pleasure speaking to people who enjoy doing what they do every day. However, one thing that has really stood out to me is how hard it can be for people to access the bigger picture outside of their team, outside of their firm. We created this podcast to share with you some of the insights, experiences and stories of the most interesting people succeeding inside risk and compliance. Today I am joined by Pekka Dare, President of the International Compliance Association. It is a huge privilege to have Pekka on the podcast today. He is a fantastically interesting man with a very unique viewpoint of the world of risk and compliance. In today's episode, we cover why commerciality and compliance go hand in hand, the real world threats behind the rules, and why it's so important that compliance training is grounded in why we do what we do, and so much more. Hope you enjoy. Pekka, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing?
I'm good, thanks, Adam. Yeah, thank you very much for having me.
No problem. It's absolutely fantastic to have you on here. So we've done a bit of an intro, but it'd be great if you could fill in the guests a little bit more about who you are, how you got involved in this crazy world of risk and compliance.
The crazy, mad world of compliance and risk. Yeah, thanks. So, yeah, I'm Pekka Dare, the president of the International Compliance Association. Without giving my age away, I feel like an old git here, but I've been in compliance for a long time. But I guess as we were chatting before, you know, very few of us as small children growing up dreamed of becoming a compliance officer, and I certainly was in that category. I'm a lawyer originally, actually, by background, and did a range of sort of private and civil and criminal law, worked for tax enforcement authorities in New Zealand and Australia. And it kind of almost by accident, I got seconded into a role as the in-house legal counsel for a unit looking at organised crime. And, you know, it blew my mind. It really did. Particularly, we were focused on a big problem you get in Australasia, which is motorcycle gangs. Oh, really? And it's fascinating when we started to look at the money flows behind it all, how they use very good lawyers, how they use very good accountants, how they intermingle their money with the real businesses and how it gets everywhere. And they use very good lawyers and very good accountants. And, you know, that exposure to that world got me really interested in the subject of, I guess, compliance, anti-financial crime, anti-money laundering. And I came back to the UK a good sort of 25 years ago and gradually drifted into more legal roles, but then I got offered a job eventually as a MLRO. And funnily enough, you know, then by a twist of fate, I remember 9/11 happening, as I'm sure all your listeners do, and that really was the game changer, because after that event, things like AML, you know, even regulatory compliance began to be taken so much more seriously across the world and in different industries, including, you know, the legal industry, insurance, banks, obviously. And I was in the right place, I guess, at the right time. In that, it was a perfect storm for me of a subject I was really interested in, which was obviously incredibly important. And you know, one of the most positive things I think you can do, you know, professionally is help, you know, do the right thing for our society and stopping horrible things like money laundering, financial crime. So that kind of got me into it. I started making connections around the kind of the policy level and with other professionals working in compliance and risk. And really my career went from there as a money laundering reporting officer for a large international financial services firm, and then into banking. And my career kind of developed that way, and I left the strict, you know, practicing as a lawyer behind me and moved more into the general compliance world. And I was fortunate enough to join the ICA about 16 years ago, when it was relatively new and small, and now it's become a global institution, and we work with compliance professionals all around the world, and it's become such an interesting and important and diverse profession globally. You know, so it's been a journey, an emotional journey. There's been tears, there's been laughter, but it's that's kind of in a nutshell how I got to be where I am today.
And what made you move to the ICA then? What was it? Was it something you were actively looking at, or what attracted you to it?
Yeah. Well, I worked in house for various institutions, financial institutions, and I'd always been interested in kind of the subject matter around financial crime, money laundering, corruption, and I'd always enjoyed kind of sharing benchmarking and sharing good practice. I'd actually engaged with the ICA to come and train my teams, and they just asked me to join. And I was looking for a bit of a change career-wise, and didn't really look back. And I think the great thing about the ICA is that we see the best practice all around the world, whether it's in a law firm or a bank. We train the police, law enforcement, and in different jurisdictions, different industries. So I've been privileged to work, everything from food and beverage, the gaming industry, energy companies, banks, police. It's just so interesting to see all the different challenges and the commonalities actually that people face in compliance. So, yeah, it was just a really exciting opportunity to join an organisation that I believed in because I'd done a qualification myself with them. I'd put my teams through it.
Yep.
So when they asked me to join, it was just a really good fit.
Yeah. And I know you're very international in what you do. You're gracing us with your presence, I think, a day after you've just flown back in from Singapore, so we've got to thank you for that. But what is your day-to-day then, for the listeners who might not understand how you fit into the whole puzzle?
Yeah, thanks. Well, there's no real common pattern with me, which is kind of the curse and the joy of my role, but it's really diverse. So I guess I'm kind of representing the ICA globally, so I'm speaking at a lot of events. I tend to be the main face of ICA, talking to, at conferences and events that we run. But I also do a lot of benchmarking and networking and forming partnerships. That's the big thing about compliance at the moment globally is people working together is really unlocking some amazing success. So partnerships between the public sector and the private sector. I've just come back from lunch with a human trafficking charity, Stop the Traffic, and we have a partnership with them. So, that kind of making partnerships, making networks is what I do. I work with a lot of regulatory and government bodies to help them raise their standards.
Yep.
So I'll also go into organisations and give briefings, board-level briefings maybe, or to compliance teams about the latest trends globally in compliance and risk, financial crime. And I guess I also I do also have my own team. I look after the academic side of ICA as well. So we have qualifications with the University of Manchester Business School.
Yep.
So it's that kind of academic rigour. I have I work very closely with our Director of Academic Standards, and we have a kind of a program there which takes up some of my time as well. But I guess if I was to sum it up, Adam, it's basically swanning around the world talking about interesting stuff to interesting people. That's pretty much my job.
Which presumably puts you in quite a unique position, right? To be involved in all these conversations at such a high level on a global scale. Yeah. So what are these trends that you're seeing at the moment? Yeah,
it's interesting. As I say, I've been in the Asia Pacific region for the last few months, and I've got the Middle East coming up. I'm in Europe for a few weeks, and what's interesting is that it's an arms race. How we manage new risks like everyone's talking about AI, but we know criminals are using AI. So how can we use it to fight back? So I think that arms race is the interesting piece. We talk about money laundering. We know. I've just got back from Singapore. They've just done a huge bust in Singapore, billions and billions of dollars being laundered through real estate companies, luxury goods, handbags, cars, and through the financial sector as well. So, it's about, I guess, keeping up with how topics around compliance and money laundering are actually what the threats are and how they're changing. Because I think one thing I would say to your listeners, the beauty about compliance roles is that it's real. We're not doing this because there's a money laundering regulation or a regulatory guidance. We're doing this because this is a real threat to our organisations and our society. So I think what's interesting is keeping up to date with the latest trends and the latest threats and how things are evolving. For example, I've just been lecturing about a new money laundering method which uses mirror transactions and involves money moving in and out of China globally. And understanding how new techniques like that work, whether you're in a law firm or a bank or a police officer, is very important because it's a real threat happening every day.
Yeah. I think often there seems to be a bit of a disconnect where, especially with more junior professionals we work with, it's not always apparent that there's that connection between what they understand they're doing on a day-to-day and the real serious positive impact they're potentially having on the world. One of our other guests has a slogan, I guess, that she uses called "Stop the Baddies," and I think people are often forgetting, that part of the role. Is there more that businesses can do from the top down to really help, especially junior people, appreciate the value in what they're doing beyond just for that business itself?
Yeah, I think that's so important. And, I've worked with a lot of people that have just started out their careers in compliance, and maybe they're going into a role like an analyst in onboarding, CDD, KYC analyst or whatever. And I think the analysts that are the good ones are the ones that understand why they're doing what they're doing, and they have the ability to think critically. So, for example, I've seen so many examples where a client has been onboarded to a law firm or a bank, and there was an obvious question crying out to be asked of that customer, but the process did not allow or did not prompt that question to be asked. And that is the reason why we need that critical thinking and understanding the context. And listen, I'm not wanting to oversell compliance. Sometimes there are processes that can be relatively mundane, and we have to have a kind of a discipline of a process to make sure we do things well and consistently. I get that, but we must make sure that when we've got people that are doing these onboarding processes, they understand the context in which they are doing those processes, and they know it's okay to question and think critically and ask, is this plausible? And I think as well, investing in your people by keeping them up to date with the latest trends is really important. There are so many amazing, interesting, important, information repositories out there on how criminals actually work, and it's not theoretical. That's the interesting thing. So I think if we can maybe just make an effort to keep that bigger picture part of the ongoing training that people do. I think that's so important. And also when we onboard people, because it is interesting. And I think human nature is when you know why you're doing something, you will do it better, especially if you think it's actually adding value. And I would say it's not just the compliance people that need this, because it's the first line as well. So it's your partners, it's your fee generators, it's your relationship managers in a bank. They need to understand the context around why we need to be careful about things like know your customer and customer due diligence.
And what is the key to getting that message across to those senior stakeholders that are the ones holding the purse strings, making decisions about investment?
Yeah, I think it's look. A lot of it comes down to common sense and commerciality, because we hear a lot about sustainability and ESG. Good compliant business is more profitable. It's as simple as that. So if we think about it that way, you're winning in so many levels, because you're winning from doing the right sort of business with the right sort of customers, which your shareholders and your other stakeholders will love. Plus, you're going to spend less remediation costs and avoid penalties if you do the right thing. Plus, you are doing the right thing for society if you're onboarding only good customers, and you're actually rejecting people involved in illicit activity. And unfortunately, there are still too many people involved in illicit activity which get into our systems, whether it's through law firms, whether it's through real estate agents, whether it's through banks. So that kind of role as a gatekeeper, which we hear a lot about, I think is one not to be taken lightly. And I think with the rise of ESG, we're seeing a lot more, I guess, realisation about the commercial benefits of doing good compliance. Because, if you think about the S and the G elements of ESG, that's what compliance has stood for many years. It's just perhaps more formally codified now with the ESG kind of taxonomies you're getting now.
I just wanted to take a moment out to thank our amazing sponsor, the International Compliance Association. The ICA are the leading professional body for the global regulatory and financial crime community, offering professional qualifications, world-class events and training. Go check them out online, and if any of the certificates or courses take your fancy, then you can get 10% discount using our code AJFOX10 at checkout. I think it's such an important point, because there is a sense that for a lot of businesses, if you could just demonstrate that commerciality, if you can demonstrate that it is giving you a competitive advantage, the investment will flow through. And it's not always apparent that some of the smaller businesses are in a position to, or have invested the initial money to be able to demonstrate the value in the first place. Are there things that particular businesses are doing well to demonstrate the value of their own investment in risk and compliance?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, to step outside law firms for a moment, if you look at some of the big banks now, they're making, and justifiably so, making big play of their successes and their contribution to fighting financial crime, and they're not being shy about highlighting the facts. You know, you look at the Standard Chartereds of this world who make a big play of the work they've done to combat animal and environmental crime, animal smuggling of wildlife and so forth. And justifiably so. HSBC, they do a lot as well. They promote the work they do around financial crime, and they've tried to put it at the heart of their business now. So I think turning that into a positive can be a competitive advantage in terms of attracting not just institutional investors but also talent. If you look at millennials now, all the surveys tell us that they want to work for ethical employers, and they will ask questions of their employer, and they will only go to employers that they think demonstrate those sort of values. So I think making it very clear from the very top of your firm that compliance, anti-financial crime is absolutely doing sustainable business is at the heart is a key. And I think if you're a compliance professional, even just starting out, you can also contribute to that by educating your firm and your senior management about why doing the right sort of business is actually commercially advantageous as well.
Are there any resources or places you might point someone in the direction of if they are, let's say, a more junior professional and they want to get that topic on the table with their managers?
Well, it would be remiss of me not to point out the ICA.
Of course.
We have, I think ICA in the past, I guess, perhaps was known more for its ongoing qualifications, but we've very much invested huge amounts in our ongoing professional learning. So we have a brand new shiny learning hub and website, which is kind of Netflix style, and it pushes you content that you're interested in and gives you that bigger context.
Yep.
So that's a shameless plug for that. But look, it
great.
really is
Plug away.
is amazing. Look, there are so many interesting organisations out there that I would point you towards. For example, some of you might have heard of OCCRP, the Organised Crime and Corruption Reporting Project.
Right.
If you ever look for them, OCCRP.org, I think it is. So every year they give an award for the Organised Crime Actor of the Year, and it's an award you don't want to win. So Prigozhin got the award last year. Of course, look what happened to him.
Yeah.
But they do. But on a serious note, they do really amazing research into the real impact of organised crime, illicit capital, how, corruption, money laundering, how it actually happens, how corporate entities are abused, how law firms are abused, how banks are abused, but in real stories that are really powerful, kind of impactful, hit you in the face. So I think sometimes people always, bizarrely, when I talk to them about compliance or anti-money laundering, particularly anti-money laundering, they'll say, oh, that must be awfully dry, which amazes me because it's the opposite of dry. It's extremely interesting. So I think there are some other organisations with great material, Global Financial Integrity, do a huge amount of really powerful work on the reality of how illicit capital flows around the world. And what's striking is developing countries really suffer. If you look at the amount of money that's stolen out of developing countries, that flows into the West, inverted commas. Yep. It's just mind blowing, and that money, what the value it could do for those countries is literally criminal. So Global Witness is another organisation. There are many of these NGOs, Transparency International. They all have very powerful stories which kind of, I guess, humanise the topic. And certainly, if you're talking to not just your senior management, people in your firm, I think all compliance people have a job to educate about why we do what we do. Yep. It's not just because there's a law or regulation. It's actually because there are real harms and problems out there. The scale of money generated from crime is hard to understand, but it's huge, and it's not academic. So I guess my advice would be, if you're trying to get that message into your firm, humanise it. Use some of these resources, and I think that is kind of winning the hearts and minds of people as to why compliance should be at the core of your business strategy, rather than just a thing you do on the side to keep the regulator off your back.
Yeah, no, that sounds like fantastic advice.
Yeah.
And I'd be interested to know, obviously a large bulk of our listeners are going to be from the law firm environment. how I don't know whether you've got data on it, but how does their investment in education differ from other sectors? Because when I started working in recruitment in the risk and compliance space, it's probably 10 years ago now, there was very little seemed to be being spent on education of risk and compliance professionals and law firms. That has changed dramatically, but it still seems to be a small amount.
Yeah, I think it's a journey. I've personally delivered some in-house training to quite a few of the big law firms in the UK, and I think we were chatting before about comparing with say banks or tier one banks, where they have literally tens of thousands of compliance teams. So the scale and the volume of the training is higher. I think historically regulators in the banking sector have put a lot more pressure on the training program, whereas perhaps law firms haven't had quite the same level of pressure from external sources, and that's probably driven it. But I have noticed a change where we're seeing much more investment in the human capital and training and development within law firms, which is great to see. We get regular intakes of compliance people working in law firms coming to ICA, which is great to see. We do get asked to come in and train more senior fee earners and partners and things like that in law firms, but it's not as much as I would like, and it's very patchy worldwide. So I think we are currently at ICA working with a large regulator in the Middle East to educate all of their non-financial service regulated businesses, including law firms, because the standard is patchy. So I think when you step outside of the UK globally as well, it is patchy, but I'm seeing a positive trend. We're seeing more investment in training for both compliance people and people in the business of law firms. But it's still got a long way to go, and I think regulators have a role to play in pushing higher standards of training that's really meaningful and effective. I think historically in a lot of law firms I've seen a lot of tick box training, which is just literally go on, watch a video, do a 5-minute quiz, and then boom, you're done till next year. That's not good enough anymore.
Well, we've got a guest coming on in the not too distant future who is involved, I guess, in gamifying some of that training to make it more involving and to try to get more out of it, I guess. And I think it is definitely such an important thing for these firms.
Yeah, we do a lot around, I think we've moved away from kind of generic training now. We do a lot around scenario-based training, which is, for example, people getting real artifacts to play with, like emails or web pages and scenarios that unfold, which ask you to think critically, and I think that sort of training that's tailored to your role is really important, rather than just saying, here's a 5-minute presentation on the Proceeds of Crime Act, and having to memorise it, which is pointless. I think what people, if you're onboarding a client as part of your job, you need to know what might the indicators of concern be, and not just what the red flags might be, but sometimes, there may be risks you identify, whether it's sanctions or money laundering risks, but those risks may be acceptable and you can mitigate them. So I think that's a really important skill for compliance officers, is understanding that actually taking risk is no bad thing. And if you can take risk as long as you mitigate it properly, and understand it properly. Yeah. And that's, I think, a really interesting skill that I would just encourage all your listeners to always try and remember, that compliance is also about commerciality as well as risk management. Yeah. And I think that's kind of the good training I've seen reflects both elements. So I think sometimes you probably had training in your career where someone gives you financial crime training or something, and it's all literally black and white. This customer has got all these red flags and they're terrible, blah, 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 you must exit them. Real life doesn't tend to be as black and white as that. So trying to make it more nuanced and realistic, I think, is making training more effective.
Yeah. So, that's been fantastic. As a last question, I guess, if we had somebody, a partner, somebody running a law firm, and they've got their head of risk and compliance who's asking them for more funding to spend on more education of the team, and they're probably looking at it through a lens of a P&L. How do we convince this partner, do you know what, up the budget, get your team more investment in education? Yeah.
I think it's a good question. I think the answer is about sustainable business models, and I think as the point I made before, sustainable business, doing the right sort of business, is going to be more profitable in the long run, and actually possibly in the short run. If you onboard the wrong sort of client, the remediation costs, the the reputational harm, the regulatory scrutiny, all of those things are just not worth it. So it makes sense to do it at the front end and do it well and do it effectively. And, I think that human capital of investing in your people so they really understand why they're doing what they're doing in this very real world of complexity that we have currently around financial crime, fraud, money laundering, sanctions risk. If you don't properly understand those risks, you're not going to have a sustainable business going forward. So I think, again, you can make compliance a competitive advantage by promoting the fact that you are a sustainable firm and you only do the right sort of business. And I think that has so many tangible benefits in terms of how investors look at you, how customers look at you, how your staff look at you, and how your regulators look at you. So it's a win-win. And, I think that's probably how I would address that.
Amazing. Well, Pekka, thank you so much for your time. We better let you go and get over your
jet lag.
Jet lag. That's it.
You're the one that's jet
Maybe
lagged.
I need a coffee as well. I was like, where's that word? Get over your jet lag. But thank you so much for your time. It's been amazing having you.
Pleasure, Adam. Thanks for having me.
Thanks a lot. We really hope you enjoyed listening to today's podcast as much as we enjoyed recording it. If you did, please do us a huge favour and share it with a friend or a colleague. The more people we can get listening, the more time and energy we can get into recording more episodes and getting the best guests and the most interesting stories and insights. I want to say a huge thank you to the ICA for their support, to Ty and Karem here in the studio, and a massive thanks to Kat for making sure everything runs so smoothly behind the scenes. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, follow us on LinkedIn to make sure you never miss an episode. Thanks for listening.